My daughter has never deployed. She has never served in any capacity that qualifies for this memorial. She works a desk job in Washington. She has for 20 years. I know this family. I know this county. And I am telling this board that Gavin Stroud earned that stone. She did not. That was my father. Standing behind a microphone in the Harwick County Civic Center, his voice filling a room of folding chairs and fluorescent light, telling 73 people, neighbors, veterans, board members, my mother, that I never served. I was in the back row, hands folded, quiet. He didn't know I was there yet, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the morning I drove into Harwick County for the first time in 14 months, and the silence that met me at the town line. When I pulled off the interstate in a rental sedan just after dawn, the air smelled exactly like I remembered. Damp pine and cut limestone, thick enough to taste. Spring had turned Harwick County into something almost gentle. Dogwoods along the access road, fog sitting low in the ditches like it had nowhere else to go. No one was waiting. No text from my mother. No missed call from my father. Just the hum of the engine and the slow crawl of the odometer ticking off the last 12 miles to a town that had stopped counting me a long time ago. I passed the Civic Center first. Single-story brick building with an American flag that needed replacing. Beside it, the Veterans Park and the construction site. I could see the pale edge of the memorial wall from the road. Limestone panels, scaffolding still up on the south face. A work tent with Boyce and Sons stenciled on the canvas. I didn't stop. I drove past, checked into a motel off Route 9 under my own name, set my bag on the bed, and sat in the chair by the window for 11 minutes without moving. I work in analysis. That's what I've told people for 15 years. Budget analysis. Contract work, mostly DC. When my aunt asks at Thanksgiving, I say, same contracts, different problems. When my mother calls, which is less often now, and asks how work is going, I say, fine, busy. When my father mentions it at all, which he does only to dismiss it, he says, whatever it is she does out there. He has never asked what it is, not once in 20 years. I commissioned out of ROTC at 22. Ensign, United States Navy. The first 5 years were conventional. Surface warfare qualification, logistics rotations, a planning billet that caught someone's attention at Norfolk. By 27, I had transferred into a world that didn't appear on any org chart my family would ever see. Joint Special Operations Command, Special Operations Planning, Cross-Branch Integration, Navy, Army, Marine, Air Force assets moving under unified command authority toward objectives I am not permitted to name. I didn't execute the raids. I planned them. The distinction matters. It also means there are no photographs of me holding a rifle in a dusty compound. No helmet cam footage. No flag-draped homecoming at a regional airport with a local news crew and a hand-painted sign. There was a lateral scar, 4 inches long, along my left collarbone. Fragment wound. Observation post-extraction in a theater I cannot identify. I wore high necklines in civilian settings. Not concealing. Simply not explaining. There were 3 successful captures of high-value targets on Joint Task Force and FBI priority lists. Operations I coordinated from encrypted planning cells with thermal imaging feeds and 16-hour mission clocks. I am not permitted to name them. I never have been. There was a call sign, Whiskey Actual, used in Joint Task Force communications by people who never saw my face and never needed to. And there was a cover story so complete, so ordinary, so deliberately forgettable that my own father built an entire narrative on top of it. Not a lie he invented, a silence I maintained. He just filled it with whatever made him comfortable. Growing up in the Stroud household meant one thing. Marshall Stroud decided what counted. He was a police captain. 30 years, Harwick County Sheriff's Department. Retired with full honors, a ceremony at the Elks Lodge, and the kind of handshake that comes with institutional weight. In Harwick County, Marshall Stroud's word was infrastructure. It didn't need evidence. It was evidence. And what Marshall decided, sometime around 2009, the year I stopped coming home in anything resembling a uniform and started saying contract work, was that his daughter had quit. Not formally. He never said it that way. He said it the way men like my father always say it, in the margins, in the introductions, in the things he chose to repeat, and the things he chose to leave out. Gavin was the one who actually served. Helena moved to D.C., and that was that. She never really stayed military. Gavin, my younger brother, 38, 18 months in the Army National Guard, domestic stateside assignments, honorably discharged, no deployments. He wore a uniform people could see, and in my father's accounting, visibility was the only currency that cleared. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd rewritten me. The evening before the hearing, my mother invited me for dinner. Marshall did not. Ruth called me at the motel and said, "I made roast chicken. Come by if you want." No warmth, no urgency, just an opening left slightly ajar, the way she'd always done it. Wide enough to enter, narrow enough to deny she'd offered. I went. The house smelled like rosemary and brown sugar. Roast chicken with crispy skin. Baked squash glazed until it caught the light. Cornbread so buttery it stuck to the knife. She had even set the table with the white plates she used to save for Easter. It looked perfect. Just like it did every holiday. And somehow more dangerous than any encrypted planning cell I'd ever sat in. Family photos lined the mantel. All of them featured Gavin, his National Guard portrait, a photo with his unit at a stateside training facility, Marshall pinning something to his chest at a family barbecue, Marshall in his sheriff's dress uniform beside the county commissioner, a framed newspaper article, Stroud Family Legacy of Service. I found my name in the 5th paragraph. Also has a daughter, Helena, who works in the federal sector. Not a single photograph of me. That was partly my doing. I had never been photographed in uniform at a family event. Operational security wasn't a switch I turned off at the county line, but standing there, looking at that mantel, seeing the story it told to anyone who walked through the front door, I understood what my silence had built. Not safety. A blank space. And my father had filled it with someone else. If you've ever been written out of a story you bled for, hit that like button and subscribe. Gavin arrived late. He nodded at me from the doorway like I was a neighbor he recognized, but couldn't quite place. "Hey, Helena. Didn't know you were coming in." "Last minute," I said. "Work stuff?" Something like that. Marshall came down the stairs in a pressed shirt. Committee chairman's posture. Shoulders square, chin lifted. The bearing of a man who had spent 30 years being obeyed and 4 more years chairing a board that let him keep the habit. He looked at me the way he always looked at me. Not with hostility, with conclusion. "Helena." A statement, not a greeting. "Dad." He sat at the head of the table. Ruth brought the chicken. Gavin talked about the memorial rededication, how the stonework looked, how the county had raised enough for landscaping, how Marshall had managed the entire project from bid to installation. 14 months of work, Marshall said, cutting his chicken without looking up. Every name verified, every branch confirmed. Done right. I folded my napkin beside my untouched plate. He didn't ask why I was in town. He didn't ask about my work. He didn't ask about the hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning in the Civic Center, the one the Veterans Advocacy Chapter had filed after a formal complaint about the memorial's engraving order. He didn't ask because he already knew, and because asking would mean acknowledging that someone had questioned him. Denial, I would learn, was their specialty. The next morning, I dressed in a charcoal coat and a simple black dress, sleeves to the elbow, hair pulled back. Nothing flashy, nothing military. I drove to the Civic Center alone, parked in the second row, and walked through the lobby past a folding table with a sign-in sheet and a laminated agenda. Item 7. Review of formal complaint. Veterans Advocacy Chapter. Memorial Stone Order discrepancy. I signed my name. I took a seat in the last row. The room filled slowly. Board members at a long table up front. Community members in the folding chairs. My mother sat in the fourth row, hands in her lap, wearing the same expression she wore to church, present but withheld. Gavin sat beside her. He had worn his National Guard service pin on his collar. Marshall took his seat at the center of the board table, chairman's position, nameplate in front of him. He surveyed the room the way he'd surveyed briefing rooms for 30 years, cataloging faces, measuring threats. His eyes passed over me in the back row without stopping. They don't know that yet. The first 6 agenda items moved quickly. Budget allocation, landscaping bids, volunteer coordination. Then the board clerk read item 7 aloud, and the temperature in the room shifted like a door had opened to a colder hallway. The advocacy chapter's representative, a woman named Sandra Miller, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain, stood and read the complaint into the record. A name had been submitted to the Memorial Stone Order 12 months ago through the chapter's standard veterans recognition process. The submission included a service branch, United States Navy, and a return address. The name was Helena Stroud. 10 months ago, a revised authorization was submitted to the engraver by the committee chairman, removing Helena Stroud's name and replacing it with Gavin Thomas Stroud, Army National Guard. Sandra Miller placed the documents on the board table and sat down. The room waited. Marshall stood. He adjusted his reading glasses. He gripped the edges of the podium with both hands, the same hands that had signed the revised order, the same hands that had chaired 14 months of meetings without once mentioning that his own daughter's name had been submitted and removed. And then he said it. Into the microphone, into the public record, into a room where my mother sat 4 rows from the front, and my brother wore a pin he'd earned in 18 months of stateside service. My daughter has never deployed. She has never served in any capacity that qualifies for this memorial. She works a desk job in Washington. She has for 20 years. I know this family. I know this county. And I am telling this board that Gavin Stroud earned that stone. She did not. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder. I didn't flinch. I stayed silent. My hands stayed folded in my lap. That was the last time Marshall Stroud spoke as chairman of anything. The board clerk made a note. Sandra Miller removed her reading glasses, and the room sat in that particular silence that follows a man who believes he has just ended a conversation. He hadn't started it. Board member Helen Ward leaned forward in her seat at the long table. She was 57, daughter of a Vietnam-era nurse, And she had the kind of patience that comes from growing up in a house where service wasn't discussed at volume. She looked at Sandra Miller. Then she looked at the document on the table. Then she looked at the back of the room where I was sitting. I held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then I looked down at my hands. Helen Ward turned to Marshall. "Mr. Chairman, the complaint references an original stone order with a return address. Is the engraver present today?" Marshall didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened. The pause was small, maybe 2 seconds. But in a room of 73 people who had just watched him deliver a verdict, 2 seconds was a canyon. "The engraver was invited," the board clerk said. "He's in the lobby." Helen Ward nodded. "Let's hear from him." The door at the side of the room opened slowly. Not dramatically. Not with force. Just the quiet hydraulic sigh of a civic center door that needed oiling. And then the measured sound of work boots on linoleum. Not military boots, not combat boots, but the kind of boots a man wears when he's spent 60 years standing over stone. Arthur Clarence Boyce was 89 years old. He moved the way limestone weathers, slowly, but with the kind of authority that comes from refusing to erode. His hands were thick-knuckled, permanently dusted with stone powder that no amount of soap would ever fully remove. He wore a dark jacket over a flannel shirt. On his left lapel, a Korean War Service pin, small, brass, dulled by decades of daily wear. He carried a manila folder. Marshall watched him cross the room. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the first flicker of a man realizing that the conversation he thought he'd ended had a second speaker. Arthur Boyce reached the podium. He did not adjust the microphone. He did not clear his throat. He opened the manila folder, removed a single sheet of paper, and placed it flat on the podium surface. Then he looked up. Not at the board. Not at Marshall. At the room. "My name is Arthur Boyce," he said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that had never needed volume because it had never needed to compete. "I own Boyce & Sons Stoneworks. I've been engraving veterans' memorials for 40 years, 14 installations across 3 counties. I keep every order I've ever received, every single one." He looked down at the paper. 12 months ago, I received a stone commission order through the Harwick County Veterans Advocacy Chapter. Standard submission form. Name, Helena Stroud. Branch, United States Navy. He paused. His stone-dusted index finger rested on a line near the bottom of the page. Return address. The room was already quiet. It got quieter. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The fluorescent light above the 4th row flickered once, then held. Ruth Stroud, seated directly beneath it, did not move. Her hands stayed in her lap. Her eyes stayed forward. But something behind her expression, something that had been carefully maintained for 15 years of deferred questions and accepted explanations, shifted, like a bone that never set right. Marshall's fingers tightened on the edge of the board table. His reading glasses caught the overhead light. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Arthur Boyce was not finished. 10 months ago, I received a revised authorization, signed by the committee chairman. He did not look at Marshall. He did not need to. The revised order removed Helena Stroud's name, replaced it with Gavin Thomas Stroud, Army National Guard. He placed the second document beside the first. Both were visible to the board members at the table. Both were visible to Helen Ward, who was already reading them. "I have been engraving memorials for 40 years," Arthur Boyce said. "When a name comes in with a Pentagon return address, I notice When that name gets removed by committee authorization and replaced with a different name, I notice that too. He looked up. I contacted the advocacy chapter 9 months ago to flag the discrepancy. I brought both documents today. The original order, the revised authorization, the chairman's signature on the revision. He closed the manila folder. He did not editorialize. He did not accuse. He simply stepped back from the podium and stood with his hands at his sides, the Korean war pin catching a thin bar of light from the window. Paper outranks personality. It always has. Marshall stood. His chair scraped against the floor, a sound that seemed louder than it should have been, as if the room itself was flinching. That return address doesn't prove anything, he said. His voice was still firm, but the cadence had changed. Faster. Defensive. The declaratives were gone, replaced by something closer to argument. Anyone can list any address. Contractors work out of federal buildings. It doesn't mean she served. It doesn't mean she deployed. He turned toward the room, toward me. For the first time since the hearing began, Marshall Stroud looked directly at his daughter in the back row. Helena works in budget analysis, he said. She does contract work. She's done contract work for 20 years. That's what she told us. That is what she told this family. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze. My hands stayed folded. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. Helen Ward spoke without looking up from the documents. Mr. Stroud, the original order lists the submitter's branch as United States Navy, not a contractor, not a civilian agency. Navy. The chapter made an error, Marshall said. The chapter submitted what they received, Sandra Miller said from her seat. We verified the branch designation with the submitting party before filing. And who was the submitting party? Marshall asked. His voice was rising now. Volume indicators. The tell of a man whose authority was being measured against paper and found lighter. Sandra Miller looked at her notes. A Navy colleague of the individual in question. Someone who grew up in Harwick County and contacted our chapter directly. Marshall's hands flattened on the table. This is a family matter. My daughter's work history is not a matter of public record, and I'm telling this board, as chairman, that the revised order stands. Mr. Chairman. Helen Ward's voice was quiet, precise. Is there anyone present who can speak to Helena Stroud's service record directly? The room shifted. Chairs creaked. 73 people looked at each other, looked at Marshall, looked at the back of the room where I sat with my hands still folded and my charcoal coat buttoned to the collar. Nobody spoke. Not yet. Then a woman in the third row stood. She was 46. Dark blazer. No insignia. Civilian clothes so unremarkable they could have belonged to any county employee at any municipal hearing in any small town in America. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was straight. Not rigid, not performative, but the kind of straight that comes from years of standing at attention until it becomes the only way your spine knows how to hold itself. She had been sitting in the third row since before the first agenda item. She had not signed the guest sheet. She had not spoken to anyone. She had watched the entire proceeding with the particular stillness of someone who was not here to observe. She was here to wait. I can, she said. The room turned. Marshall blinked. Walt Cooper, board member, Stroud ally, seated 2 chairs from Marshall, leaned forward. Ma'am, this is a public comment period. Could you state your name and your standing to address this board? The woman in the third row reached into the interior pocket of her blazer. She produced a military identification card and held it at arm's length, face out, toward the board table. Commander Diane Foster, United States Navy. Active duty. Walt Cooper's pen stopped moving. I served under Captain Helena Stroud's operational planning authority across 2 joint task forces. Her voice carried the way military voices carry. Not loud, not forceful, but with the absolute clarity of someone who has delivered briefings in rooms where imprecision costs lives. Her call sign was Whiskey Actual. She held that designation in Joint Task Force communications at a level I am not authorized to specify in this setting. She lowered the ID card. She did not sit down. Marshall's face lost 2 shades of color. The shift was visible from the back row. His lips parted. He pressed them together. His hands, still flat on the board table, had gone white at the knuckles. "Captain," Walt Cooper repeated. He said it slowly, the way someone repeats a word they've heard but not yet processed. "Captain," Commander Foster confirmed. "06, United States Navy. That is a rank equivalent to colonel in the Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps. For context." She paused. She looked at Marshall. Captain Stroud's planning work contributed to 3 operations, resulting in the capture of high-value targets on Joint Task Force and FBI priority lists. I am not authorized to name those operations. I am authorized to confirm they occurred, and that Captain Stroud's role was central to their execution. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to quiet. Gavin Stroud, seated beside his mother in the 4th row, had not moved. His hand had drifted to the National Guard Service pin on his collar. His fingers rested on it. Then slowly, his hand dropped to his lap. Ruth Stroud sat very still. A gust of spring air pushed through the cracked window at the side of the room. It moved across the folding chairs, across the board table, across the back row where I sat. My collar shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. The lateral scar, 4 inches long along my left collarbone, caught the light for a fraction of a second before the fabric settled. Ruth turned her head. Not quickly, not dramatically. She turned the way a woman turns when she sees something she has spent 15 years not looking for. Her eyes found the scar, held there, then moved to my face. I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. She looked away. Her hands, folded in her lap, tightened around each other until her knuckles matched her husband's. Marshall gripped the table edge. "I didn't know," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. The declaratives were gone. The chairman's cadence was gone. What remained was something smaller. "She never said. She never told us. I didn't." Commander Foster did not look at him. She looked at me. Then she lowered her chin. Not a salute, not in civilian clothes, not in a civic center, but the slight, deliberate incline of the head that one officer gives another when rank protocol is suspended, but respect is not. "Ma'am," she said, quiet, final. The way you close a briefing when the intelligence speaks for itself. Marshall Stroud's hands slid off the table. He sat down without being asked. His chair didn't scrape this time. He simply folded into it, the way a man folds when the architecture he built with 30 years of institutional weight meets a single piece of paper with a Pentagon return address and a commander who calls his daughter ma'am. Helen Ward let the silence hold for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up her pen, looked down the length of the board table, and spoke without raising her voice. "I'm calling a motion to remove Marshall Stroud as chairman of the Harwick County Veterans Memorial Committee, effective immediately. and to restore the original stone order submitted through the Veterans Advocacy Chapter 12 months ago. The name Helena Stroud, United States Navy, will be engraved as originally commissioned. Walt Cooper opened his mouth, then closed it. His pen still hadn't moved. "Second," said the board member to Helen's left. "A man named Davis, Vietnam-era infantry." He didn't look at Marshall. He looked at the two documents Arthur Boyce had left on the table, the original order and the revised authorization, as if they were the only things in the room that mattered. They were. The vote was 7-2. Walt Cooper voted no. A woman named Barbara Taylor, who had served on the committee for 6 years and attended Marshall's retirement ceremony, voted no. The other 7 voted without hesitation, without discussion, without looking at the man who had chaired their meetings for 4 years and signed an authorization that erased his own daughter from a wall meant to honor people exactly like her. Marshall did not speak during the vote. He sat in the chairman's chair, which was no longer his, with his hands in his lap and his reading glasses still on. He looked like a man sitting in a room he no longer recognized because the room had not changed. He had. The board clerk recorded the vote. Sandra Miller collected the original documents. Arthur Boyce stood by the side wall with his manila folder tucked under his arm, his Korean war pin catching the last of the morning light through the cracked window. He had said everything he needed to say. The paper had said the rest. I stood. I buttoned my charcoal coat. I walked up the center aisle between the folding chairs, past Gavin, past my mother, past the board table, and out through the lobby without stopping. Commander Foster was already outside. She stood by the flagpole, hands in the pockets of her dark blazer, watching the scaffolding around the memorial wall shift in the spring wind. She didn't turn when I reached her. She didn't need to. "You didn't have to come," I said. "No," she said. "I didn't." That was all. 2 officers in civilian clothes, standing in a county parking lot beside a memorial that would soon carry the right name. Neither of us said anything else for a long time. Neither of us needed to. That evening, my mother called the motel. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. "Helena." Her voice was thin, not broken, thin, like fabric stretched past its thread count. "I didn't know about the scar." I said nothing. "I should have asked," she said. "Years ago. I should have asked what you actually do." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She was quiet for a long time. I could hear the clock in the kitchen, the same clock that had hung above the stove since I was 12. "Your father is in the study," she said. "He hasn't come out since the hearing. He wants to talk to you." "No." "Helena." "He doesn't want to talk to me, Mom. He wants to explain. There's a difference." She didn't argue. She didn't have the architecture for it. Not anymore. 15 years of deferred questions had hollowed out the framework, and now there was nothing left to hang an argument on. "I'm proud of you," she said. Quietly. Almost to herself. No conditions. No advice. Just that. I exhaled, for the first time in years. Then I hung up. The weeks that followed moved with the kind of bureaucratic inevitability that small counties specialize in. Marshall Stroud's removal as chairman became a matter of public record. The Harwick County Gazette ran a 4-paragraph story on page 3. Not front page, not buried. Just the steady documentation of institutional correction. Memorial Committee chairman removed following order discrepancy. They spelled his name correctly. They spelled mine correctly. They did not mention my rank. I had not asked them to. Marshall tried to frame it as a procedural disagreement. He told neighbors it was a misunderstanding about eligibility criteria. He told his brother it was political, that the advocacy chapter had an agenda, and he'd been caught in the crossfire. He told himself, I imagine, that he had been protecting the integrity of the memorial by applying standards he understood. But paper outranks personality. Arthur Boyce's documents were now part of the county's permanent administrative record. The original order, the revised authorization, the chairman's signature on the revision. Anyone who wanted the truth could walk into the county clerk's office and read it. Most people in Harwick County don't visit the clerk's office, but they talk. And what they talked about in the weeks after the hearing was not Marshall Stroud's version of events. They talked about the Pentagon return address. They talked about the commander in the third row who called his daughter Captain. They talked about Arthur Boyce, 89 years old, Korean War, stone dust in his knuckles, who kept every receipt and didn't stay quiet when the paper didn't match. Marshall resigned from 2 additional volunteer boards within the month: the Elks Lodge, the County Historical Society. No one asked him to resign. No one needed to. The architecture of his credibility, 30 years of institutional weight, 4 years of committee authority, a lifetime of declaratives delivered without challenge, had been measured against a single manila folder and found insufficient. Gavin called me once, 3 weeks after the hearing. I was in a SIF outside Arlington, reviewing operational planning documents for a joint task force rotation I cannot name. My personal phone was in a locker 2 floors above me. I found the voicemail 12 hours later. Helena, it's Gavin. Long pause. The sound of someone sitting in a truck with the engine off. I didn't know. I know that's not enough. I didn't know what he did with the order. Another pause. I wore that pin to the hearing. The guard pin. I keep thinking about that. I keep thinking about how I wore it, and you were sitting in the back row in a coat. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He said something harder. I should have asked you. 14 years, and I never once asked you what you actually do. I saved the voicemail. I did not call back. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing I could say at that point that wouldn't sound like absolution. And absolution wasn't mine to give, not for something he'd have to sit with on his own. Some wars aren't fought with fists. They're won in what happens next. The rededication ceremony was held 6 weeks after the hearing, a Saturday morning in late spring. The scaffolding was down. The limestone panels had been cleaned and resealed. Arthur Boyce had done the work himself. His grandson had offered to handle the correction, but Boyce refused. He engraved the name by hand, the way he had engraved 14 memorials across 3 counties in 40 years. Letter by letter. Helena Stroud, United States Navy. I stood in the back row, civilian clothes, charcoal coat, no insignia, no medals, no uniform. The wind was warmer than it had been at the hearing, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass from the Veterans Park and the faint chemical sharpness of new sealant on stone. Helen Ward spoke briefly. She read the names on the memorial, all of them, in alphabetical order, the way they should have been read the first time. When she reached the S section, she did not pause on my name. She did not add emphasis. She simply read it the way she read every other name on that wall, as a fact that needed no decoration. That was enough. Marshall was not present. Ruth was. She sat in the second row with her hands folded and her eyes fixed on the wall. When the ceremony ended, she stood, walked to the limestone panel, and touched the letters of my name with her index finger. She didn't say anything. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned around and walked to her car. Gavin stood near the back. He had not worn his guard pin. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at the wall. He looked at me. He looked away. I didn't approach him. I didn't approach anyone. I stood where I was until the crowd thinned, then walked to the memorial alone. I read my name. I read the other names beside it. Men and women from Harwick County who had served in conflicts I'd studied, planned for, and in 3 classified cases, helped resolve. I ran my finger along the limestone the way Arthur Boyce's hands had shaped it. The stone was cool. The letters were precise. Within 90 days, I funded a $75,000 endowment through the Harwick County Veterans Advocacy Chapter. The endowment covers maintenance, cleaning, and future engraving for veterans' memorials across 3 counties. The endowment paperwork lists the donor as H. Stroud. No rank, no branch, no return address. Arthur Boyce was the first person to send a note. Handwritten. 6 words on a piece of shop stationery with the Boyce & Sons letterhead and a faint trace of stone dust along the fold. Received. Thank you. Proper order restored. I kept it. I keep everything that matters. I learned that from him. 4 months after the hearing, I sat in a planning cell in a facility I cannot name, reviewing intelligence assessments for an operation I cannot describe. The room was cold. The screens glowed blue. A junior officer handed me a briefing folder and said, "Captain Stroud, the task force commander is ready for you." Not Helena. Not whatever it is she does out there. Not the blank space on a mantle or the missing name on a wall. Captain Stroud. I closed the folder. I stood. I walked into the briefing room the way I have walked into every room for 20 years. Weight forward on the balls of my feet. Posture my father once called, "like you're always about to leave." He was right about that. I was always about to leave. He just never understood where I was going. Silence had always been the language of my career. The cover story, the classified deflections, the years of budget analysis, and same contracts, different problems. I had built a life inside that silence, a life measured not in what people saw, but in what I accomplished while they weren't looking. My father filled that silence with a story that made sense to him. Gavin accepted the story because it made his own service feel larger. My mother accepted the story because challenging it would have meant challenging the man she'd married 44 years ago. And some foundations are easier to preserve than examine. But silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the weight of what people think they know about you. Pressed down so hard, it squeezes the breath out of your own truth. And sometimes the only way to breathe again is to let someone else read the paper you've been carrying all along. I didn't come back to Harwick County for vindication. I didn't come back for an apology. I came back because a meticulous old veteran with stone dust in his hands kept a receipt, and because the name on that receipt was mine. I work in a facility now where no one uses my last name. No titles, no plaques, just Helena. Whiskey Actual when the comms are hot, Captain Stroud when the briefing room doors close, and on a limestone wall in a small county park in a town that stopped counting me a long time ago, my name sits exactly where it belongs, between the names of people who served, engraved by a man who understood that the record is the only thing that lasts. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't revenge. It was proper order restored. I am no longer the blank space. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.